Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're going to take a really fascinating, completely impartial look at the incredibly complex realities bubbling just beneath our current situation of war. You know, if you've been following the news lately, the immediate events in the Middle East probably feel like this sudden, chaotic explosion, right? But here's the thing about geopolitics. Things are rarely as random as they seem on the surface. It's like a giant puzzle. So we're going to systematically deconstruct the architecture of this conflict together. We're going way past the breaking headlines to examine the actual structural movements, the legal traps, and all that strategic maneuvering happening right now behind closed doors.
Okay, let's dive into this. We absolutely have to start with a historical anchor for the events of July 8th. On that exact date, standing right in front of 31 NATO leaders at a summit in Ankara, Turkey, Donald Trump delivered these exact words. And literally within hours of this statement, the narrative across every major global news network was totally uniform. An agreement had been violated, commercial ships were attacked, and a brand new conflict had officially ignited. But this highly publicized quote actually serves as our starting point for a much deeper analysis of the timeline.
Which brings us to the core investigative question we really need to ask today. When we look at this mainstream narrative of a sudden, unpredictable escalation, are we missing a much deeper, highly calculated geopolitical architecture? To truly understand the ongoing current situation of war, we've got to peel back the layers of what actually happened. Step by step. We need to figure out, does the evidence point to random chaos or a carefully engineered plan?
All right, layer 1, the setup and the trap.
So, to understand the immediate sequence of events in the Gulf, we have to establish a really vital mental model. It's called the exit trap. Think of it kind of like being stuck in a lease for an apartment you absolutely hate. If you just unilaterally break the lease, well, you pay steep penalties and you look like the bad guy, right? But if you quietly let small infractions slide, leave some noise complaints unaddressed, and deliberately set up a situation where the landlord violates the lease first, suddenly you have the legal and moral cover to walk away completely clean. In geopolitics, this is a highly calculated strategy. You accumulate conditions that force a completely predictable defensive response from your adversary.
Let's look at how this exact model applies to the timeline of this conflict. On June 17th, a 14-point Memorandum of Understanding was signed, and this explicitly included a 60-day negotiation window to work through disputes using established communication channels. That window was supposed to run all the way until mid-August. Yet, on July 8th, barely a third of the way through that agreed-upon window, the U.S. abruptly launched over 80 airstrikes against targets in southern Iran.
And here is a shocking data point to keep in mind. 0. That is the exact number of times the United States used those official diplomatic channels over those weeks to discuss routing commercial ships through the disputed Oman route. Actually, scratch that. Instead of using this 60-day window to negotiate, commercial vessels were just sailed directly into waters that were already flagged as a designated oversight zone, without a single heads-up or diplomatic notification.
But the military strikes? That was only half the story of July 8th. On that exact same calendar day, General License X was completely revoked. For context, this was the document that legally allowed Iran to export oil during the negotiations. The moment it was revoked, roughly 63 million barrels of Iranian crude oil that were in transit worldwide were essentially frozen in place. With literally one signature, approximately $5 billion was instantly frozen. Not seized by military force, mind you, but frozen by paperwork. And this triggered a completely foreseeable fury, which led to immediate retaliatory strikes on 85 American military sites across Bahrain and Kuwait.
So the crucial point is this brilliant, if totally chaotic, concept of engineered ambiguity, because the airstrikes and the revocation of that oil license happened within hours of each other. On the exact same day, both sides can legitimately sit there and claim the other acted first. Iran claims the U.S. pulled the oil license and attacked, which justifies self-defense. Meanwhile, the U.S. claims Iran attacked commercial shipping first, justifying the strikes. You see? There is no clean narrative here. Only a chaotic PR war. And in a PR war, the party with the louder, more established global megaphone usually wins. The exit trap was closed perfectly.
Layer 2, the global beneficiary.
Now, what if the most important player in this Middle Eastern conflict isn't actually in the Middle East at all? Let's pan the camera away from the Persian Gulf for a second and look at the broader situation of global conflict. In the weeks prior to July 8th, a really significant chunk of Patriot interceptor stockpiles had to be quietly redirected to the Middle East theater to protect U.S. assets. Well, at 1:19 a.m. Moscow time on July 8th, the exact same night as the Gulf escalation, Russia launched a massive ballistic missile strike on Kyiv. They fired 54 missiles. Ukraine,
whose air defense capacity was now severely strained, managed to intercept only 4 of them. You see, Russia and Iran have a standing intelligence sharing agreement. Russia provides the satellite targeting data Iran needs to strike U.S. assets in the Gulf. In return, the U.S. shifts its finite air defense resources east, leaving the door wide open for Moscow and Europe.
And the benefits for Moscow weren't just military, they were instantly financial. On July 8th, Brent crude oil prices spiked by 6% in a single trading day, jumping from about $73 to $78 a barrel. To put that into perspective, for a country exporting roughly 7 million barrels a day, that translates to millions of dollars in extra daily revenue. And Russia achieved all of this without deploying a single soldier, drone, or ship to the Middle East. They just provided the intel and waited.
Which brings us to a crucial geopolitical concept dictating this current situation of war. The CINK model. CINK stands for China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. The underlying strategy here isn't about defeating a superpower in a direct head-to-head battle. No way. It's about strategic overload. By coordinating pressure across multiple theaters at the exact same time, we're talking Ukraine, the Strait of Hormuz, the Taiwan Strait, the Korean Peninsula, they completely exhaust American military bandwidth and resources. You don't defeat the enemy, you just exhaust them by making them fight in way too many places all at once.
Layer 3, the Hormuz control myth.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the raw data completely dismantles a very persistent mainstream fantasy. There's this massive assumption out there that the U.S., with its incredible naval power, can simply dominate and control the 33-mile-wide Strait of Hormuz. But look at the structural realities on the ground, or, well, in the water. First off, the actual navigable shipping lane, it's only about 3 kilometers wide in each direction. You don't need a massive navy to shut that down. You just need mines. And we're talking advanced naval mines with acoustic and pressure sensors that can sit completely dormant on the seafloor for months. Clearing a sophisticated minefield in a tiny 3-kilometer lane while under active fire is not a weekend job. Pentagon auditors themselves have acknowledged this could take weeks or even months, during which the global economy would take unprecedented damage.
Furthermore, you've got to factor in Iran's mosaic defense doctrine. After watching the extremely rapid fall of Saddam Hussein's highly centralized military back in 2003, Iran completely redesigned its architecture. They divided their command structure across 31 individual provinces. Each one has independent weapon stockpiles, their own communication networks, and the authority to fight cellularly. There is literally no single central headquarters you can just bomb to stop the military from functioning. So decapitation strikes, they're structurally ineffective, because there's no single central node left to surrender.
And honestly, perhaps the biggest barrier to the relevance of controlling Hormuz at all is the infrastructure itself. In May 2025, so a full year before this current conflict even began, a billion-dollar railway connecting Iranian oil fields, running right through Central Asia and going directly to the Chinese market, was completed. No ships required, no Strait of Hormuz. Rational actors have literally spent years building incredibly expensive infrastructure to bypass Hormuz entirely.
Layer 4. Ambiguity and strategic silence. This is where we look at the legal homework of the agreement and the profound geopolitical power of doing absolutely nothing. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the initial legal conflict is so incredibly messy. The Memorandum of Understanding was inherently, almost deliberately, ambiguous. Look at the clash right here between Article 5 and Article 10. Iran points straight at Article 5, claiming the U.S. blatantly violated passage protocols in Hormuz. The U.S., on the other hand, points right back at Article 10, claiming Iran's actions meant they forfeited their rights to any economic relief in oil export licenses. Because the text leaves definitional authorities so incredibly vague, neither side has a clean, undeniable narrative of who actually broke the deal first. It is a document perfectly engineered to fall apart.
So as we process all this heavy information, here's what you really need to take away, and what we should all be watching for next as this current situation of war continues to unfold. First, monitor Moscow's diplomatic statements, or honestly, more importantly, their lack thereof. Second, keep a really close eye on the tanker data. If Iran begins routing those 63 million frozen barrels via that land-based China railway we talked about in a non-dollar transaction, that strongly signals they're settling in for a long structural conflict, not a quick negotiation. And finally, watch the internal coherence of U.S. foreign policy. When a leadership basically blows up an agreement negotiated by its own architects, it drastically impacts the credibility and stability of absolutely any future global deals.
To wrap things up, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. On the night of July 8th, while the U.S. and Iran were locked in a highly publicized, incredibly explosive conflict,
Why did Vladimir Putin remain completely, totally silent about Hormuz? He said absolutely nothing, while his country made billions off the oil spike, while utilizing shared satellite data, and while launching his largest ballistic missile attack on Ukraine in weeks. In the highest levels of geopolitics, complete silence during a massive, highly profitable crisis, it is never neutral. Silence is a strategy, and understanding that strategy might just tell us exactly where this engineered war is really heading next.